The billionaire knocked on his ex's house on New Year's Eve to mock her, but everything changed when he saw her twins crying. The doorbell rang just as Sophia was trying to calm the twins. Her heart sank when she peered through the peephole. "What the hell are you doing here, Maxwell?" she demanded, opening the door just enough to block his view inside. Maxwell Grant's smirk was as cold as the December air. "Happy New Year, Sophia. Thought I'd check how life's treating you since you walked away from everything." His eyes swept over her worn sweater with undisguised satisfaction. "This isn't a good time," she whispered, glancing nervously behind her as a child's wail pierced the air. Maxwell's smirk vanished. "Is that a baby crying?" "Please leave," Sophia begged, but it was too late. The door swung wider, revealing the living room where two identical toddlers sat red-faced and feverish in their playpen. Maxwell's face drained of color. "They have my eyes," he whispered. "How and—" "Congratulations," Sophia said bitterly. "You're a father. Now please go. Have you ever had your entire world turned upside down in a single heartbeat? That moment when everything you thought you knew shatters like glass at your feet? If you've ever had life humble you when you least expected it, this story will resonate in your soul. You are the silent witnesses to life's most profound moments, the believers in second chances even when they seem impossible. If your heart beats for redemption and healing, tap that like button right now. If you believe everyone deserves the chance to become better than their mistakes, right? I believe in Maxwell's redemption in the comments below. Stay with me till the very end to see how a man who had everything but valued nothing discovers the true meaning of wealth in the eyes of children he never knew existed. 3 years earlier, Maxwell Grant stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Chicago penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath him. Behind him, Sophia packed her suitcase in silence, each item folded with the same precision she'd brought to their 5-year marriage. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said without turning around. His reflection in the glass showed a man at the height of his power, tailored suit, confident stance, the cool detachment that had helped him build Grant Enterprises from nothing into a billion-dollar tech empire. Sophia paused, a sweater half folded in her hands. "No, Max. I made that mistake 5 years ago when I convinced myself you might change." The truth hung between them like smoke. They'd met when Sophia was hired as his executive assistant, smart, capable, and one of the few people who wasn't intimidated by his intensity. She'd seen potential in him beyond the ruthless businessman everyone else knew. He'd been drawn to her warmth, her steady presence, the way she could calm a room with just a smile. For a while, it had worked. She organized his life. He gave her the security she'd never had growing up in her small Atlanta suburb. The wedding at the Drake Hotel had made the society pages. The honeymoon in Santorini had been picture perfect. But pictures lie. "I gave you everything," Maxwell said, finally turning to face her. "The house in Lake Forest. The vacations. The charity foundation with your name on it. What more could you possibly want?" Sophia zipped the suitcase closed with a finality that made his jaw clench. "I wanted you, Max. Not your money. Not your name. You. Present. Engaged. Someone who comes home before midnight and remembers we had dinner plans. Someone who wants the same future I do. This is about the baby thing again, isn't it?" His voice hardened. "I've been clear from day one. Children don't fit into my life plan." "No, they don't fit into your spreadsheets and quarterly projections," Sophia corrected, meeting his gaze directly. "And that's why I'm leaving. Because I'm not a line item you can minimize or a meeting you can reschedule." Maxwell's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do? You signed a prenup. You'll get the settlement we agreed on, but it won't last forever. You think teaching art to kindergartners is going to pay for your Nordstrom habit? I'd rather shop at Target and breathe than suffocate in Gucci," she replied, lifting her suitcase off the bed. "My sister's picking me up downstairs. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the rest." Something flashed in Maxwell's eyes. Not hurt, because Maxwell Grant didn't do hurt, but something close to panic, quickly masked by anger. "You walk out that door, Sophia, and you're on your own. Completely. Don't come crawling back when reality hits." Sophia paused at the bedroom doorway, her shoulders straight despite the weight she carried. "You know what's sad, Max? You've built this empire, but you're the poorest man I know." The slam of the front door echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Maxwell told himself it was for the best. Told himself she'd realize her mistake. Told himself he didn't miss the sound of her laugh or the way she'd leave coffee by his bedside on Sunday mornings. He threw himself into work with renewed vengeance. Expanded into 3 new markets. Acquired 2 competitors. Made the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The Man with the Midas Touch." No one at the office dared mention Sophia's name. His new assistant learned quickly that personal calls were to be screened with military precision. The divorce was handled by lawyers. Papers signed without a face-to-face meeting. Life moved on. Or at least, that's what he told himself during those 3 a.m. moments when the penthouse felt too quiet and too large. 18 months after the divorce, Maxwell found himself at a charity gala in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons. He was scanning the crowd with practiced disinterest when he overheard a conversation at the bar. "Did you hear about Sophia Grant?" "Well, Sophia Carter now, I guess." Maxwell froze, his scotch halfway to his lips. "Such a shame." Another woman continued. "Living in that tiny place in Rogers Park. I heard she's barely making ends meet teaching at that community center." "That's what happens when you leave a man like Maxwell Grant," the first woman replied with a laugh. "From penthouse to basement. Though I have to admire her pride, refusing any help from mutual friends." Maxwell set down his untouched drink and walked away, something uncomfortable settling in his chest. Pride. That was it. Stubborn, foolish pride. She'd chosen this struggle over the life he'd offered. The thought followed him home that night, and for weeks afterward. Sophia struggling. Sophia regretting. Sophia finally understanding what she'd thrown away. By the time December rolled around, the thought had crystallized into something darker. He wanted to see it for himself. Her failure, her regret. Wanted confirmation that he'd been right all along. It was pathetically easy to get her address from his private investigator. The same PI reported she hadn't dated anyone seriously since the divorce. Lived quietly. Taught art classes. Kept to herself. New Year's Eve seemed like perfect timing. Symbolic. While everyone else celebrated fresh starts, he'd remind her of what she'd lost. He'd be heading to Aspen afterward for a weekend with investors, but this detour felt necessary. Closure, he told himself, though the word tasted false even in his thoughts. The Rogers Park neighborhood was exactly as depressing as he'd imagined. Modest brick apartment buildings, cars that had seen better decades, holiday decorations that looked tired and cheap in the fading light. Maxwell parked his Bentley at the curb, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. Let them look. Let them wonder what someone like him was doing in a neighborhood like this. Let Sophia see what she'd given up. He straightened his cashmere coat and checked his reflection in the car window. Perfect. Successful. Untouchable. The walk to her ground-floor apartment took him past a small playground dusted with snow and a community garden now dormant for winter. Her door was painted a cheerful yellow that seemed out of place among the grays and browns of the building. Maxwell took a deep breath, rehearsing his casual opening line. The smirk that would say everything his words wouldn't. The satisfaction of seeing recognition in her eyes, not just of him, but of her mistake. He pressed the doorbell and waited. The weight of 3 years of resentment and something else, something he refused to name, sitting heavy in his chest. The door opened, and there she was. Sophia looked different. Her dark hair was shorter now, falling just below her shoulders instead of the long waves he remembered. She wore no makeup, and the designer clothes she'd once filled their walk-in closet with had been replaced by worn jeans and a faded blue sweater with a stain on the sleeve that looked like paint. Or maybe baby food. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "They have my eyes," he repeated, his voice barely audible over the crying. "How is this possible?" Sophia's expression hardened as she stepped back, reluctantly allowing him inside. The apartment was small but warm, nothing like the minimalist luxury he surrounded himself with. Colorful throws draped over a secondhand couch. Children's books stacked on a coffee table. Finger paintings taped to the refrigerator. A modest Christmas tree still stood in the corner, topped with a paper star clearly made by inexperienced hands. "I was 8 weeks pregnant when I left," she said, moving to the playpen where the twins were working themselves into a full meltdown. "Found out the day before. I was going to tell you over dinner, but you canceled." Again. Maxwell stood frozen in the entryway, unable to process what he was seeing. 2 children. His children. A boy and a girl, both with his dark hair and the distinctive Grant family eyes. that unusual shade of blue-gray that had marked his father and grandfather before him. "You kept this from me?" The shock was giving way to anger now. "You had no right." "I had every right." Sophia cut him off, lifting the little girl who immediately buried her face in her mother's neck. "You made your position on children crystal clear. Multiple times. That was before." "Before what, Max? Before they existed? That doesn't change who you are." She bounced gently, trying to soothe the feverish child. Emma and Ethan don't need a father who sees them as inconveniences, as disruptions to his perfect life plan. The boy, Ethan, pulled himself up on the edge of the playpen, his little face flushed and tear-streaked. He stared at Maxwell with unmistakable curiosity despite his discomfort. "They're sick," Maxwell said, stating the obvious. Sophia sighed, the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Ear infections. Both of them. The pediatrician in Lincoln Square called in antibiotics, but they're miserable until the medicine kicks in." She glanced at the clock on the wall, which should be soon, thank God. Maxwell found himself moving forward without conscious thought, drawn to the playpen as if by magnetic force. Ethan watched him approach, hiccuping through his tears. "They're two?" he asked, though he could do the math. 26 months. Sophia shifted Emma to her other hip. December babies. Born 3 weeks early. The timeline aligned perfectly with their last month together. Maxwell remembered how tired Sophia had seemed, how she'd blamed it on stress, how she'd tried one last time to talk about their future before giving up. "Why are you here, Maxwell?" Sophia asked, the weariness in her voice cutting through his thoughts. "It's New Year's Eve. Shouldn't you be at some black tie event? Or on a private jet to somewhere exotic?" The question reminded him of his original purpose, the spiteful satisfaction he'd come seeking. It seemed hollow now, childish even, in the face of this revelation. "I heard you were struggling," he said finally, the practiced speech abandoned. "I wanted to see for myself. If I'd fallen flat on my face without you." Sophia's laugh held no humor. "Sorry to disappoint. We're doing just fine." Maxwell looked around the small apartment again, noting details he'd missed in his initial shock. The second-hand furniture, the patched curtains, the way Sophia's sweater had been mended at the elbow. "This is fine to you?" he asked, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. "We have everything we need," she replied with quiet dignity. "A roof over our heads. Food on the table. The twins are healthy, usually. I teach art classes that I love. We're happy, Maxwell. It might not look like your definition of success, but it's ours." Emma whimpered against Sophia's shoulder, her little hand clutching her ear. Ethan had sat back down in the playpen, his cries softening to occasional sniffles as he continued to stare at the stranger in their home. "You should have told me," Maxwell said, the anger returning. "Whatever you think of me, I had a right to know about my own children." "And what would you have done?" Sophia challenged. "Thrown money at the situation? Hired nannies so you wouldn't have to be bothered? Or fought me for custody out of spite, only to leave them with staff while you worked 18-hour days?" The accuracy of her assessment stung more than Maxwell wanted to admit. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The car service, confirming his pickup time for the airport. Aspen, the investors, the deal he'd been working on for months. Sophia saw the flicker of recognition on his face. "Go ahead," she said, nodding toward his pocket. "Answer it. That's always been your choice." Something in her tone, not bitter, just resigned, made him hesitate. He silenced the phone without looking at it. "They need medicine," he said instead. "And probably food. Have you eaten?" The question seemed to catch Sophia off guard. "I know. I was going to order something after they fell asleep." "Let me help," Maxwell said, the words surprising him as much as her. "Just tonight. We can figure out everything else later." Sophia studied him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity against years of disappointment. Finally, she nodded toward the kitchen. "There's children's Tylenol in the cabinet above the sink. They're due for another dose. And they might eat some applesauce if you can find it in the fridge." It was a small concession, but Maxwell felt the weight of it. He removed his expensive coat and draped it over a chair, rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, and stepped into a role he'd never imagined for himself. The kitchen was tiny compared to the gourmet space in his penthouse. No Viking range or marble countertops here. Just basic appliances and cabinets that had seen better days. He found the medicine where she'd said it would be, noting with a pang how the cabinet was organized with the same methodical precision Sophia had once brought to his life. When he returned to the living room with the medicine and 2 small bowls of applesauce, Sophia had settled on the couch with Emma in her lap. Ethan remained in the playpen, his cries now reduced to occasional whimpers. "Here," Maxwell said, handing her the medicine dropper. "Let me take her while you do this." Sophia hesitated, protective instinct warring with exhaustion. "She might not." "Let me try," he insisted gently. To both their surprise, Emma allowed herself to be transferred to Maxwell's arms. She stared up at him with watery eyes, her little face flushed with fever. "Hello, Emma," he said softly, the name feeling strange and yet right on his tongue. She didn't smile, but she didn't cry either, regarding him with the solemn curiosity of the very young. Sophia administered the medicine with practiced efficiency, then did the same for Ethan. "They should feel better soon," she said, setting the dropper aside. "The doctor said the fever should break by morning." Maxwell nodded, still looking down at the child in his arms. His daughter. The word echoed in his mind, foreign and yet undeniable. He had a daughter and a son. They existed in the world, had been existing for over 2 years without his knowledge. "I can take her back," Sophia offered, misreading his silence for discomfort. "No," he said quickly. "No, she's fine." And she was. Emma had settled against his chest, her eyes growing heavy as the medicine began to take effect. One tiny hand clutched the fabric of his shirt, a shirt that cost more than Sophia probably made in a week of teaching. The thought made something twist painfully in his chest. "Why didn't you ask for money?" he asked quietly, careful not to disturb the drowsy child. "The settlement from the divorce was nothing compared to what I could have provided for them." Sophia sank onto the couch, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as she must have felt. "Pride, at first," she admitted. "You were so convinced I'd come crawling back, and I refused to give you the satisfaction. And later, she glanced at Ethan, who was finally settling down in his playpen. "Later, I saw who they were becoming. Happy, kind, curious about everything. I didn't want to risk having your conditions attached to financial support. I didn't want them raised with the same pressure you grew up with." Maxwell wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the weight of Emma in his arms made the words die in his throat. Instead, he found himself asking, "Do they know about me?" "They know they have a daddy who lives far away," Sophia said carefully. "They're too young to understand more than that." The simple answer carried the weight of all her choices, all her sacrifices. Maxwell looked around the small apartment again, seeing it with new eyes. Not as evidence of Sophia's failure, but as testament to her determination to create a life on her own terms, for herself and for their children. "I should put her down," Sophia said, rising from the couch. "They share the bedroom with me. It's not much, but I'm sure it's perfect," Maxwell interrupted, surprising himself again. He stood carefully, Emma still cradled against him. "Show me." The bedroom was small but cozy, with a double bed for Sophia and 2 cribs squeezed along the opposite wall. A bookshelf overflowed with children's stories, and a small dresser was topped with framed photos, the twins as newborns, at their first birthday, playing at the park. Maxwell noticed with a pang that he appeared in none of them. Sophia gently took Emma from his arms and laid her in one of the cribs, tucking a worn stuffed rabbit beside her. "She can't sleep without Hoppy," she explained softly. Maxwell watched as she moved to the playpen to retrieve Ethan, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion. The practiced ease with which she handled their son spoke of countless nights like this one, nights he'd known nothing about. "You've done this alone," he said as she settled Ethan in the second crib. It wasn't a question. "My sister helps when she can," Sophia replied, brushing Ethan's dark hair from his forehead. "And there's a mom's group at the community center. We trade babysitting sometimes." They stood side by side in the dim room, watching the twins sleep. The silence between them felt different now, not charged with resentment or accusation, but heavy with all that had been lost, all that had never had the chance to be. "I had a speech prepared," Maxwell admitted as they returned to the living room. "Something smug about how you should have listened to me, how I was right about everything." Sophia sank onto the couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "And now I don't know what to think." He remained standing, too restless to sit. "You kept my children from me, Sophia, for over 2 years. I kept them from being pawns in whatever game you decided to play," she corrected. I've seen how you operate, Max. Everything's a transaction. Everyone's a potential asset or liability. That's not fair, isn't it? She looked up at him, challenge in her eyes. Tell me honestly, if I told you I was pregnant, what would you have done? Maxwell opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. The truth was, he didn't know. The Maxwell of 3 years ago had been so certain about what he wanted and didn't want from life. I would have provided for them, he said finally. Financially, sure. But they need more than money, Max. They need time, attention, patience, all the things you never had enough of. The accusation stung because it echoed his own thoughts during those rare moments of self-reflection. Maxwell Grant, master of the business universe, hopeless at the things that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. People can change, he said, the word surprising him. Sophia's laugh was soft, but not unkind. Says the man who came here tonight to gloat about my supposed failure. The reminder of his original purpose sent a flush of shame through him. He'd driven to Rogers Park with spite in his heart, ready to savor her regret. Instead, he'd found something that upended his carefully ordered world. I should go, he said, reaching for his coat. You need rest, and I have a flight to catch. Of course you do. Sophia's voice held no surprise, just that same resignation he'd heard earlier. Aspen, or Street Barts this year? Aspen. Investor meeting. The explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears. But I want to talk about them, when I get back. We need to figure out arrangements. Arrangements, Sophia repeated, the word hanging between them. You mean money. I mean everything, Maxwell insisted. Visitation, support, their future. Sophia stood, wrapping her arms around herself in a gesture he remembered from their marriage. Her way of creating armor when she felt vulnerable. They're not a corporate merger, Maxwell. You can't just decide you want to be involved and expect everything to fall into place on your schedule. Before he could respond, a cry came from the bedroom. Ethan, from the sound of it. Sophia sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. I thought the medicine would give them a few hours at least, she murmured, moving toward the bedroom. Maxwell caught her arm gently. Let me, please. The surprise in her eyes was almost worth the uncertainty churning in his gut. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Just talk to him softly. Sometimes that's all he needs. Maxwell entered the darkened bedroom, guided by the soft glow of a night light shaped like a moon. Ethan stood in his crib, tears streaming down his flushed face, one hand tugging at his ear. Hey there, Maxwell said awkwardly, approaching the crib. That ear's still bothering you, buddy? Ethan hiccuped, regarding the stranger with wary curiosity through his tears. Maxwell had no idea what to do. His experience with children was limited to brief, uncomfortable encounters at company picnics and charity events. Acting on instinct, he reached into the crib and lifted Ethan into his arms. The boy was surprisingly solid, a warm weight against his chest. For a moment, Maxwell thought he'd made a terrible mistake as Ethan stiffened in his hold. Then, miraculously, the child relaxed, his head dropping to Maxwell's shoulder as if it belonged there. That's it, Maxwell murmured, beginning to sway gently. It's going to be okay. He paced the small room, one hand supporting Ethan's back, the other cradling his head. The intimacy of the moment, holding this small person who carried his DNA, who existed because of him, was overwhelming. I didn't know about you, he whispered, the confession meant for no one but the drowsy child in his arms. But I'm here now. Whether it was the medicine finally taking effect or the comfort of being held, Ethan's cries gradually subsided. His breathing deepened, small puffs of air warming Maxwell's neck. Maxwell continued pacing, reluctant to put the boy down. In his arms was tangible proof of something he'd never allowed himself to consider, a legacy beyond buildings and bank accounts, a future that extended past quarterly reports and stock options. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, holding his sleeping son, before he became aware of Sophia watching from the doorway. You're a natural, she said softly, surprise evident in her voice. Hardly, Maxwell replied, though a strange pride bloomed in his chest at her words. He just wore himself out. Still, he doesn't usually take to strangers. I'm not a stranger, Maxwell said, the words carrying more weight than he'd intended. I'm his father. Something flickered across Sophia's face. Caution, perhaps, or the ghost of old hopes long abandoned? Yes, she agreed quietly. You are. When Ethan was settled back in his crib, they returned to the living room. The clock on the wall showed it was nearly midnight, the new year approaching, bringing with it possibilities neither of them had anticipated when the evening began. Maxwell's phone buzzed again. The car service, wondering about the delay. Aspen waiting. Investors expecting him. For the first time in his career, Maxwell Grant hesitated. You should go, Sophia said, reading his expression. They're going to sleep through now, I think. The worst is over. And if it's not? The question surprised them both. Then I'll handle it. Like I always do. There was no bitterness in her tone, just simple fact. Maxwell looked at his phone, then back at Sophia. At the apartment that was nothing like the life he'd imagined for her, yet somehow contained everything that mattered. What if I stayed? He asked, the words emerging before he could analyze them, strategize them, weigh their implications. Just tonight. In case they need something. Sophia's surprise was evident. What about Aspen? Your investors? They'll wait. Maxwell made the decision as he spoke. Some things are more important. The words hung in the air between them, an admission he'd never made in all their years together. Sophia studied him, searching for the catch, the angle, the hidden agenda she'd grown accustomed to finding in his gestures. The couch pulls out, she said finally. It's not the Four Seasons, but it's clean. It's perfect, Maxwell replied, and was surprised to find he meant it. He sent a brief message to his assistant, rescheduling the Aspen trip. For the first time in his career, Maxwell Grant was postponing a major business meeting for personal reasons. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. Instead, he found himself helping Sophia make up the pull-out couch with sheets that smelled of the same lavender detergent she'd used during their marriage. The familiar scent brought back memories he'd tried to bury. Sunday mornings reading the paper together, her laugh when he tried and failed to cook dinner, the way she'd always known when he needed quiet and when he needed to talk. There's leftover Chinese in the fridge, she offered. If you're hungry. I could eat, he admitted, realizing he'd skipped dinner in his eagerness to arrive at her doorstep with his now-forgotten speech. They sat at her small kitchen table, sharing cartons of cold lo mein and kung pao chicken. The domesticity of the moment was surreal after 3 years of luxury restaurants and business dinners. Tell me about them, Maxwell said, breaking the awkward silence. The twins. What are they like? The question opened a floodgate. Sophia's face transformed as she spoke about their children, Emma's determination, Ethan's gentle nature, their shared love of stories and music. Emma said her first word at 10 months. More, of course. She's always wanted more of everything. Ethan took longer, but when he started talking, it was in complete sentences. Pride colored every word. They're so different, but they have this connection. They can communicate without speaking sometimes. It's amazing to watch. Maxwell listened, trying to absorb every detail, acutely aware of all he had missed. First words. First steps. First birthdays. Do you have pictures? He asked. Besides the ones in the bedroom? Sophia hesitated, then reached for her phone. Hundreds, she admitted, opening her photo gallery. It's mostly what my phone storage is used for these days. She passed him the phone, and Maxwell found himself scrolling through a visual history of his children's lives. Emma and Ethan as newborns, tiny and red-faced. Their first Christmas. A trip to the Lincoln Park Zoo. Halloween costumes, a lion and a lamb. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by the fact that he was seeing them for the first time. They're perfect, he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. They are, Sophia agreed softly. They're the best parts of both of us, Max. The implication that there had been good parts of him worth passing on caught him off guard. After their divorce, he'd assumed Sophia saw only his flaws, his failures as a husband. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, the words emerging from some long-buried place of honesty. For how things ended. For not listening when you tried to tell me what you needed. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the unexpected apology. I'm sorry too, she said after a moment. For keeping them from you. I thought I was protecting them, but maybe I was punishing you too. That wasn't fair. The clock on the microwave flipped to midnight as they sat in Sophia's small kitchen, the remains of their impromptu dinner between them. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks popped and fizzled, celebrating the arrival of a new year. Happy New Year, Maxwell said quietly. Happy New Year. Sophia echoed, a small smile touching her lips. Not exactly how either of us planned to spend it, I'm guessing. No, he agreed. But I'm glad I'm here. The admission surprised them both. Maxwell Grant didn't do vulnerability or sentimentality. He made calculated decisions based on potential outcomes and benefits. Yet sitting in this modest kitchen, with his children sleeping in the next room, he felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates realigning after years of pressure. What happens now? Sophia asked, voicing the question hanging between them. I don't know, Maxwell admitted, the uncertainty unfamiliar and uncomfortable. But I want to be part of their lives, Sophia. I need to be. She studied him, wariness in her eyes. And when you get bored, when board meetings and business trips seem more important than playground visits and pediatrician appointments. The question stung, but he couldn't deny its validity. His track record spoke for itself. I can't promise I'll be perfect at this, he said slowly. I don't know the first thing about being a father, but I want to learn. Before Sophia could respond, a cry came from the bedroom. Emma this time, her voice rising in distress. They both stood, but Sophia gestured for him to sit. Let me check. She sometimes has nightmares. Maxwell waited, listening to the murmur of Sophia's voice as she comforted their daughter. A few minutes later, she returned with Emma in her arms, the little girl's face tear-streaked and feverish again. Her temperature's back up, Sophia explained, pressing a kiss to Emma's forehead. And she won't settle. Can I help? Maxwell offered, surprising himself again. Sophia hesitated, then nodded. Could you get a cool washcloth? And the Tylenol again? It's been long enough for another dose. Maxwell moved with purpose, grateful for concrete tasks. He dampened a washcloth in the bathroom sink and retrieved the medicine from the kitchen. When he returned, Sophia had settled on the couch with Emma curled against her chest. Here, he said, handing her the washcloth. What else do you need? Just sit with us, Sophia replied, gently placing the cool cloth on Emma's forehead. Sometimes presence is the best medicine. Maxwell lowered himself onto the couch beside them, close enough to see the delicate curve of Emma's cheek, the dark sweep of eyelashes so like his own. She regarded him solemnly as Sophia administered the medicine. Emma, Sophia said softly, this is your daddy. Remember how I told you he lives far away? He came to visit you tonight. Maxwell's breath caught at the simple introduction. Your daddy. 2 words that redefined his entire existence. Emma's fever-bright eyes studied him with the unnerving directness of the very young. Daddy? She repeated, the word both a question and a test. Yes, Maxwell managed, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. I'm your daddy. Emma considered this information with grave seriousness before extending one small hand toward him. Maxwell reached out, engulfing her tiny fingers in his own. The trust in that simple gesture, unearned, undeserved, humbled him in a way no business victory ever had. She has your stubbornness, Sophia observed with a hint of her old humor. And your focus. When she wants something, the whole world disappears until she gets it. Poor kid, Maxwell said, attempting lightness despite the emotion tightening his throat. It's not all bad, Sophia replied, surprising him. That determination will serve her well someday, just like it did you. They sat together as Emma's eyelids grew heavy, the medicine taking effect. Maxwell found himself studying Sophia's profile in the soft lamplight, the strength in her jawline, the gentle curve of her lips, the tiny lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. Motherhood had changed her, he realized. Not diminished her, as he might once have feared, but deepened her somehow. The Sophia who had left his penthouse 3 years ago had been beautiful, capable, kind. The woman beside him now was all those things still, but with an added dimension of resilience and purpose that commanded respect. You're staring, she said without looking at him. Sorry, Maxwell replied, not sorry at all. I was just thinking that motherhood suits you. Sophia glanced at him, surprise flickering across her features. That might be the first time you've complimented something that wasn't related to my efficiency or appearance. The observation hit with uncomfortable accuracy. During their marriage, he'd praised her organizational skills, her social grace, her ability to manage their household and his schedule with equal precision. But had he ever acknowledged the deeper qualities that made her who she was? I was an idiot, he said simply. Sophia's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I think I'm hallucinating from sleep deprivation. The teasing note in her voice, so familiar, so missed, drew a genuine laugh from him. Don't push your luck, Carter. Wouldn't dream of it, Grant. The easy exchange felt like stepping into a warm room after being out in the cold, familiar, comfortable, right? For a moment, they were just Max and Sophia again, before stock prices and board meetings and irreconcilable differences had carved a canyon between them. Emma had fallen asleep against Sophia's chest, one hand still loosely holding Maxwell's finger. The sight of their daughter, peaceful between them, created a lump in his throat he couldn't swallow past. I've missed so much, he said quietly. Sophia's expression softened. Yes, she agreed, never one to sugarcoat the truth. But they're still so young, Max. There's time to be part of their lives going forward, if that's what you really want. It is, he said with a certainty that surprised him. 24 hours ago, he couldn't have imagined making such a declaration. Now, he couldn't imagine anything else. It won't be easy, Sophia warned. Children don't run on schedules. They get sick at inconvenient times. They need consistency, not just grand gestures when it fits your calendar. I know, Maxwell acknowledged. I'll have to make changes. Significant ones, she emphasized. Your life is in Chicago. We're here in Rogers Park. That's not a small commute for regular involvement. The practical considerations hadn't occurred to him yet. He'd been too overwhelmed by the emotional revelation to think about logistics. But Sophia was right, as usual. His penthouse downtown, his office in the Loop, his life built around 18-hour workdays and international travel. None of it was compatible with being a present father to 2 toddlers in Rogers Park. I'll figure it out, he said, the determination in his voice the same one that had built his company from nothing. Whatever it takes. Sophia studied him, searching for the sincerity behind his words. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slightly. We should put her back to bed, she said, glancing down at Emma. If we're lucky, they'll sleep until morning now. Maxwell followed Sophia to the bedroom, watching as she gently laid Emma in her crib. Ethan still slept soundly in his own bed, one arm flung above his head in complete abandon. They look like angels when they're sleeping, Sophia whispered as they tiptoed out. It's nature's way of ensuring their survival when they're driving you crazy during waking hours. The comment drew another smile from Maxwell. This side of Sophia, the wry humor, the practical wisdom of motherhood, was new to him, and he found himself wanting to discover more. Back in the living room, exhaustion suddenly hit him like a physical force. The emotional roller coaster of the evening, combined with the late hour, left him drained in a way no business negotiation ever had. You should get some sleep, Sophia said, noting his fatigue. The pullout is ready whenever you are. What about you? I'll sleep in with the twins. It's easier if they wake up again. Maxwell nodded, suddenly awkward. They had shared a bed for 5 years of marriage, yet now the thought of sleeping under the same roof felt strangely intimate. Sophia, he said as she turned toward the bedroom. Thank you for letting me stay, for introducing me to them. She paused, her expression unreadable in the dim light. They deserve to know their father, Max. And despite everything, you deserve to know them too. After she disappeared into the bedroom, Maxwell removed his tie and dress shirt, draping them carefully over a chair. The pull-out couch was nothing like his king-sized bed with its custom mattress, but as he stretched out beneath the clean sheets, he felt a peculiar sense of peace. The ceiling above him had a small water stain in one corner. The radiator clanked rhythmically in the background. From the street came the occasional sound of revelers making their way home from New Year's celebrations. Also different from his soundproof penthouse with its perfect silence and climate control. Yet somehow, this felt more like home than anywhere he'd been in the past 3 years. Maxwell closed his eyes, his mind still processing the seismic shift that had occurred in his life. He had children, a son and daughter who carried his blood, his eyes, perhaps even parts of his personality he'd never fully appreciated. And he had a second chance. Not with Sophia. He wasn't foolish enough to imagine that bridge could be rebuilt, but a chance to be something more than the driven, isolated man he'd become. A chance to create a legacy beyond buildings and bank accounts. As sleep claimed him, his last conscious thought was that he'd come to Sophia's door seeking confirmation of her failure, only to discover the magnitude of his own. Morning arrived with the soft babble of children's voices and the scent of coffee brewing. Maxwell opened his eyes, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back as he sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He checked his phone. Dozens of messages from his assistant, the head of his legal team, the investors waiting in Aspen. For the first time in his career, Maxwell Grant set the phone aside without responding. Some things were more important. Following the sound of voices, Maxwell found Sophia in the kitchen with the twins secured in matching high chairs. Emma spotted him first, her eyes widening with recognition. "Daddy," she announced, the word still new on her tongue but delivered with surprising confidence. Ethan turned at his sister's exclamation, studying Maxwell with the same solemn curiosity he'd shown the night before. "Daddy," he echoed more quietly, testing the sound. The simple word, one he'd never expected to hear directed at him, stopped Maxwell in his tracks. Sophia looked up from where she was cutting banana slices, her expression a mix of caution and something softer. "They remember you," she said. "That's a good sign." Maxwell approached the high chairs, unsure of the protocol for greeting toddlers you'd just met the night before. "Good morning," he said, feeling oddly formal. Emma responded by offering him a slightly squished piece of banana from her tray. The gesture, so innocent and trusting, caught him off guard. "That's very generous," he said, pretending to eat the fruit while actually palming it. The maneuver earned him a delighted giggle from Emma and a small smile from Sophia. "Coffee?" she offered, gesturing to the pot. "It's not the single-origin Ethiopian you used to have delivered, but it's caffeine." "Coffee would be great," Maxwell replied, settling into a chair between the twins. "How are they feeling?" "Much better. The fever broke around for this morning." Sophia poured him a mug and slid it across the table. "No cream, one sugar. You still take it that way?" The fact that she remembered such a small detail after 3 years apart shouldn't have affected him, but it did. "Yes, thank you." Watching Sophia move around the kitchen, efficiently preparing breakfast while answering the twins' constant questions and requests, Maxwell was struck by how different this was from their life together. Their mornings in the penthouse had been choreographed affairs, his protein shake and briefing documents prepared by their housekeeper, Sophia's careful makeup and designer outfits, separate cars waiting to take them to their respective destinations. This chaotic, messy breakfast scene with banana-smeared fingers and cheerful plastic dishes should have been his worst nightmare. Instead, he found himself oddly captivated by its authenticity. "I need to make some calls," he said after finishing his coffee. "Reschedule some things." Sophia nodded, understanding the implications. "Use the bedroom if you need privacy. We'll be fine out here." The calls were exactly as difficult as Maxwell had anticipated. His assistant was bewildered by his sudden change of plans. The investors in Aspen were displeased. His COO demanded to know what emergency could possibly take precedence over the acquisition they'd been planning for months. To each of them, Maxwell gave the same simple explanation: family situation. Unavoidable. We'll reschedule for next week. Family situation. The words felt foreign on his tongue, yet undeniably right. When he emerged from the bedroom, he found the kitchen cleaned up and the living room transformed into a play area. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor between the twins, helping them stack colorful blocks into precarious towers. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing up at him. "It will be," he replied, lowering himself to the floor beside them. "Mind if I join?" Ethan immediately offered him a red block, a peace offering, or perhaps a test. Maxwell accepted it solemnly, adding it to the tower with exaggerated care. When the structure inevitably toppled, Ethan's laughter, bright and uninhibited, was the most beautiful sound Maxwell had ever heard. They spent the morning in domestic simplicity. Maxwell learned that Emma loved books about animals, that Ethan could identify every color correctly, that both twins had inherited Sophia's artistic inclinations and his own stubborn determination. He learned that parenting was physically demanding in ways he hadn't anticipated, the constant bending, lifting, chasing. That toddlers asked, why, with relentless curiosity. That Sophia had seemingly endless reserves of patience, explaining the same concepts repeatedly without frustration. Most of all, he learned that the connection he felt to these small humans wasn't just biological. With each interaction, each shared smile, each small discovery about their personalities, invisible threads were forming, binding him to them in ways he couldn't have imagined 24 hours earlier. They need to nap soon, Sophia announced as lunchtime approached. They're still recovering from being sick. Of course, Maxwell said, checking his watch automatically. I should probably get going anyway. I have to. He stopped himself, the habitual excuse dying on his lips. Did he really have to get back to the office? Would the world end if Maxwell Grant took a weekend off for the first time in? He couldn't remember how long. Actually, he amended, I don't have to do anything. Unless you need me to leave? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Sophia studied him, her expression thoughtful. You could come back for dinner, she suggested finally. If you want to. They're always more energetic after their nap. The invitation was cautious, limited, but it was more than he deserved after showing up at her door with mockery in mind just hours ago. I'd like that, Maxwell said simply. Around 5, then. Nothing fancy, probably mac and cheese. It's their favorite. Mac and cheese sounds perfect. As Maxwell gathered his coat and phone, he found himself reluctant to leave. The pull of his old life, the meetings, the deals, the constant forward momentum, seemed weaker somehow, like a habit he'd outgrown without realizing it. At the door, he hesitated. Sophia, I know we have a lot to figure out. Legal arrangements, support, visitation. But I want you to know I'm serious about being in their lives. I believe you mean that right now, she replied carefully. But this is all very new, Max. The novelty will wear off. The reality of parenting isn't glamorous or convenient. I know that. Do you? Her gaze was direct, challenging. Because they can't afford for you to drift in and out of their lives when it suits your schedule. They need consistency, commitment. The words echoed their final arguments before the divorce. Her accusations that he was committed to his company, but not their marriage. His insistence that she was asking for more than he could give. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, Maxwell said quietly. Neither am I. Sophia's expression softened slightly. That's my point, Max. We've both changed. Let's take this slowly, make sure whatever arrangements we make are sustainable for everyone. It was reasonable, mature, exactly the measured approach that had always characterized Sophia's decision-making. Yet Maxwell felt an uncharacteristic impatience, a desire to solve everything immediately, to make up for lost time in one grand gesture. But that impulse, he realized, was part of the problem. His tendency to bulldoze through obstacles rather than navigate them carefully. To treat relationships like business deals that could be closed with the right offer. You're right, he conceded. One step at a time. The relief in her eyes told him it was the right response. I'll see you at 5. Maxwell spent the afternoon in a daze, walking through the Rogers Park neighborhood that Sophia and the twins called home. He passed the community center where she taught art classes, a small playground dusted with snow where he could imagine the twins playing in warmer weather, a modest grocery store where a handwritten sign advertised specials on diapers and baby food. So different from the gleaming downtown world he inhabited, with its luxury boutiques and exclusive restaurants. Yet there was a warmth to this community, a realness that the sterile perfection of his life often lacked. By the time he returned to Sophia's apartment, Maxwell had made a decision. Not the grand, sweeping kind that had characterized his business career, but something quieter and ultimately more significant. The door opened to reveal Sophia in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Behind her, the twins chased each other around the living room, their earlier illness apparently forgotten in the resilient way of young children. Right on time, she noted with approval. Some things don't change. Some things do, Maxwell replied, handing her the bag he carried. I brought dessert. And wine. If that's okay. Sophia peeked into the bag, her eyebrows rising at the modest bakery cookies and bottle of reasonably priced Merlot. Not the imported delicacies or rare vintages he would have chosen in his previous life, but selections from the neighborhood shops he'd passed that afternoon. Very okay, she said with a small smile. Come in. They've been asking about you all afternoon. Dinner was exactly as promised. Macaroni and cheese from a box, carrot sticks, apple slices. Maxwell couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten such simple fare, yet sitting at Sophia's small table with Emma and Ethan chattering between bites, he found himself more present, more engaged than during any business dinner at Chicago's finest restaurants. After the twins were bathed and put to bed, a chaotic process involving much splashing, several stories, and negotiations about which stuffed animals could sleep in the cribs. Sophia and Maxwell settled on the couch with the wine he'd brought. "They're amazing," Maxwell said, the inadequate words failing to capture the wonder he felt. "You've done an incredible job with them, Sophia." "They make it easy," she replied, though the pride in her voice was evident. "They're good kids, because they have a good mother." He meant it sincerely, without the patronizing tone that might have colored such a comment during their marriage. Sophia accepted the compliment with a nod, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind all day. "What happens now, Max?" "Really?" Maxwell took a sip of wine, gathering his thoughts. "I want to be part of their lives. Regular visits, financial support, involvement in decisions about their future. Whatever you're comfortable with, to start. And your work? Your life in Chicago? We'll have to adapt." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. "I've been thinking about this all day. I can delegate more. Work remotely when needed. Maybe even look at property closer to here." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "That's a significant change." "They're worth it," Maxwell said simply. "And I've missed enough already." The silence that followed was contemplative rather than awkward. Finally, Sophia set down her wine glass and turned to face him fully. "I need you to understand something, Max. I'm not the same woman who left your penthouse 3 years ago. I don't need rescuing, and neither do the twins. We've built a life here. It's not luxurious, but it's ours. If you want to be part of it, it has to be on terms that respect that." "I know," Maxwell assured her. "I'm not trying to swoop in and take over. I just want a chance to be their father." "And what about us?" Sophia asked quietly. "We'll always be connected through the twins, but we need to be clear about boundaries." The question caught him off guard. In the whirlwind of discovering his children, Maxwell hadn't allowed himself to consider what it meant for his relationship with Sophia. The woman who had once been his wife, his partner, the only person who had ever truly seen beyond his carefully constructed facade. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I came here last night wanting to hurt you, to prove I was right about everything. Instead, I found this. Them. A life I never knew I wanted until I saw it." Sophia's expression remained guarded, but something in her eyes softened. "It's been a lot to process in 24 hours. For both of us. For what it's worth," Maxwell said carefully, "seeing you with them, the mother you've become, the life you've built on your own terms, I respect you more than I ever did during our marriage. And that's saying something, because I always respected you, even when I was terrible at showing it." The admission cost him something, pride, perhaps, or the last vestiges of the armor he'd built after she left. But it felt right, necessary even, to acknowledge the truth between them. "Thank you for that," Sophia said softly. "And for staying last night. For helping with the twins. It meant a lot to have someone to share the load, even just for one night." "I'd like to share more of it," Maxwell replied. "Not just the fun parts, but the hard ones too. The middle of the night fevers and the tantrums, and whatever else comes with being a parent." Sophia smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Be careful what you wish for, Grant. You haven't experienced Emma's full meltdown mode yet." "I look forward to it," he said, surprising himself with his sincerity. "All of it." As they finished their wine, making tentative plans for the coming weeks, Maxwell felt something settle within him, a sense of rightness, of purpose beyond the next deal or acquisition. He had come to Sophia's door seeking evidence of her failure, only to discover the possibility of his own redemption. The new year was just hours old, yet already it had brought the most profound change of his life. Not in his portfolio or his professional achievements, but in the recognition of what truly mattered. 2 small children sleeping peacefully in the next room, and the chance to be the father they deserved. If you've ever had life humble you when you least expected it, hit that like button right now. Sometimes our greatest blessings arrive disguised as our worst moments, teaching us what truly matters when we thought we already had all the answers. If you believe in the power of second chances and the courage it takes to become better than our mistakes, subscribe to Mr. Rich Romance Stories for more tales that remind us what real wealth looks like. Share in the comments a moment when an unexpected encounter changed your perspective on what truly matters in life. Because sometimes, like Maxwell, we need to lose our way completely before we can find what we've been searching for all along.